The deep valleys and dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains hold stories as ancient as the very rocks that form their steep slopes. Our story begins within this isolated landscape, in McDow County, West Virginia, around the year 1923. Here, generations of families lived cut off from the outside world for decades. The Hollisters lived in a small log cabin at the very end of a road that turned impassable during the harsh winters. Their isolation was so complete that for 4 or 5 months each year, they saw no one but each other. This seclusion would create the perfect conditions for a tragedy spanning generations. Jeremiah Hollister, the family patriarch, was a tall, bony man with a thick beard and intense blue eyes. Widowed at 42, he raised his delicate-featured daughter, Martha, alone. Her mother, Sarah, had died during a difficult childbirth when Martha was just 6 years old. The baby, a boy, had also not survived. From that point on, father and daughter lived a solitary existence in their small cabin. The nearest neighbors were almost 10 kilometers away, making visits a rare occurrence. The pastor from the small local church made an effort to visit once a year, usually in the summer. He observed that Martha, now 14, seemed to be growing more withdrawn, avoiding eye contact and often keeping her arms wrapped around herself. Jeremiah was always a strange man, recalls Eleanina Davis, now 93, one of the few still alive who knew the Hollisters. Even before Sarah passed, he hardly ever came down to town. It was always Sarah who came for supplies, always in a hurry, always looking over her shoulder like she feared someone was following her. Locals often commented on the strange dynamic between the father and daughter. On the rare occasions they were seen together at the village store, Martha appeared like a shadow, always a step behind her father, answering questions with only monosyllables. The winter of 1937 was especially severe in the mountains. It was during this time that Martha, then 20 years old, became pregnant with her first child. When spring finally arrived, Martha did not come to town with her father. Rumors started to swirl when Jeremiah was spotted buying baby clothes. "My daughter is expecting," was all he offered, his face as unreadable as the mountain stone. Suspicions grew among the townspeople. No one had seen Martha with any man, and no suitor had been known to climb the mountain to court her. The community began whispering increasingly dark theories. It was Dr. William Foster, the region's only doctor, who was finally summoned to the Hollister cabin on a rainy night in June 1938. Martha was in labor, and complications had forced Jeremiah to seek help. What Dr. Foster discovered in that cabin would haunt him for the rest of his days. He found a pale and fragile Martha giving birth to a girl whose facial features immediately suggested the possibility of consanguinity to the experienced doctor. The infant was born with several characteristics common in children from close familial unions: heart defects, extra digits, and a visibly underdeveloped jaw. She survived only 3 days. Martha never revealed the father's identity, but the doctor's suspicions were recorded in his diary, along with the disturbing note that Jeremiah seemed more devastated by the loss than a grandfather typically would. "He held her as if she were his own," the doctor wrote. "He wept in a way that made me turn away, as if I were witnessing something too intimate, too sacred in its perversion." In those remote mountains, where the law's reach was short, it wasn't unusual for families to intermarry. Cousins wed cousins, uncles married nieces, all in an effort to keep land within the family. But even in this context, certain lines were seldom crossed. A relationship between father and daughter was a taboo that few communities would tolerate. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. You won't want to miss any of these shocking stories that reveal the dark truths hidden within American families. Subscribe now to dive deep into humanity's most concealed secrets. After the death of Martha's first daughter, a heavy silence fell over the Hollister cabin. For nearly a year, no one in town saw Martha. Jeremiah came down alone for supplies, avoiding any conversation. Then, in April 1939, Martha was pregnant for a second time. The child, a boy named Elijah, was born at home with the help of a local midwife, Ida Mae Jenkins, who was called only at the last moment. "That house had a strange smell," Ida Mae reported years later. "Something that reminded me of a wounded animal, a scent of despair and resignation. And when I saw the baby, I understood why. The boy was born with visible deformities. His fingers were fused, forming a sort of claw, and his eyes were different colors, one blue like Jeremiah's, the other brown like Martha's. More alarming was his abnormally large head, a sign of hydrocephalus. "That boy won't survive the winter," Ida May told Jeremiah, who received the news with a silent nod. Surprisingly, Elijah survived not just one winter, but the next 5 years. He never learned to speak more than a few disjointed words, and his movements were limited. Martha carried him everywhere, even as he grew too large for it. Over the following years, Martha became pregnant twice more. The third child, a girl named Ruth, was born with less obvious physical deformities, but her mental development was clearly compromised. The fourth child, another boy, was stillborn in 1944 and was buried in the small family cemetery behind the cabin. "That family always had trouble with babies being stillborn or dying young," explains Harlan Thompson, a local historian. Records show the Hollisters came to these mountains in the 1820s, and since then had married almost exclusively among their own cousins. This pattern of consanguineous marriage created a concentration of problematic genes that manifested in increasingly severe ways. Tragedy returned in 1945 when Elijah, then 6 years old, succumbed to pneumonia during a particularly bitter winter. At the funeral, Martha was seen holding the hand of Ruth, now 4. Neighbors also noticed that Martha appeared to be pregnant once again. Martha's fifth child was born in June 1946, a girl named Sarah in honor of Martha's late mother. Unlike her older siblings, Sarah seemed relatively healthy. Her eyes were a deep blue, nearly identical to Jeremiah's, and her early development appeared normal. Sarah's apparent normality brought a shift in Jeremiah's behavior. He started bringing her to town, showing her off with a pride the locals found unsettling. He treated her as if she were his own daughter, not his granddaughter, recalls Clementine Parker, who worked at the general store then. He kept pointing out how smart she was, how fast she learned. The resemblance between them was undeniable. Same eyes, same shape of the face. As Sarah grew, it became clear she had escaped the worst of the genetic consequences that afflicted her siblings. At 5, she attended the local school sporadically during warmer months. Her teacher, Miss Abigail Wilson, noted that despite some learning difficulties, Sarah was considerably more advanced than her sister Ruth. It was through Sarah that the outside world began to get glimpses of the true nature of life in the Hollister cabin. On a rainy autumn day in 1952, Sarah arrived at school with a visible bruise on her face. When Miss Wilson asked her about it, the girl finally spoke. "Daddy got angry because Mommy didn't want to sleep in his bed anymore," she said with the disconcerting innocence of a child. "He says Mommy is his, that she always has been since Grandma died." Miss Wilson reported the incident to the local sheriff, John Buchanan, but with no concrete evidence beyond a child's word, he was hesitant to intervene. "Those mountain families have their own ways," the sheriff said. "It's not our place to interfere unless there's a clear and present danger." The winter of 1952 to 1953 further isolated the Hollister cabin. When spring came, Martha was seen in town with Ruth and Sarah, but she looked worn down, older than her 36 years. Most alarming was Jeremiah's absence. It wasn't until July 1953 that the truth emerged, when a hunter named Joseph Miller got lost near the Hollister property. He reported seeing a fresh grave in the family plot. A rough headstone was carved with the name Jeremiah Hollister and the date of death, January 12, 1953. "I thought it was strange nobody in town knew he'd died," Miller told the sheriff. "But the strangest thing was what I saw through the cabin window. Martha was sitting at the table with the 2 girls, and she looked happy. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders." The summer of 1953 brought changes. With Jeremiah gone, Martha seemed to find a new freedom. She started coming to town more often, planted a small garden, and let Sarah attend school regularly. Ruth, though still limited, showed improvements in her behavior. It was during this time that Martha met Jacob Wheeler, a middle-aged widower who had recently moved to the area. A carpenter seeking refuge in the mountains after his wife's death, Jacob, unlike the locals, paid no mind to the rumors about the Hollisters. "Everyone's got a past," he would say. "What matters is the present and how we choose to live from here on out." The friendship between Martha and Jacob grew slowly, built on chance meetings at the store and brief chats after Sunday services. For a woman who had lived her entire life under her father's oppressive control, Jacob's simple kindness felt like water in a desert. In October 1953, Jacob asked permission to formally court Martha. The community reacted with a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. How could a decent man like Jacob be interested in a woman with Martha's history? But secrets in small towns rarely stay buried. One Sunday after church, Clementine Parker approached Jacob in the parking lot. "You know who those girls' father is, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and insinuating. Jacob, uncomfortable, replied that he assumed it was Martha's late husband. Clementine let out a dry laugh. "Martha was never married, Jacob. Those girls, their father is the same man who was Martha's father. Jeremiah Hollister kept his own daughter. You understand what I'm telling you? You're getting mixed up with a cursed family." The revelation hit Jacob like a physical blow. He drove for hours on the winding mountain roads, trying to process what he'd heard. That night, he drove to the Hollister cabin. Martha was on the porch, as if she'd been waiting. "You found out, didn't you?" she asked, her voice calm but resigned. Jacob nodded, words failing him. "I understand if you never want to see me again," Martha continued. "But before you go, I want you to hear my story." And so, under the starry Appalachian sky, Martha Hollister told her story. She spoke of how the abuse began shortly after her mother's death. How she'd tried to run away at 14, only to be found, dragged back, and chained to the bedpost for weeks as punishment. How, over the years, she had borne several children, each carrying the genetic weight of that forbidden union. "I loved them, you know," she said, tears streaming silently down her face. "Despite how they were conceived, despite the deformities, despite everything. They were my children. I just wanted to protect them, to give them some kind of chance." Jacob listened in silence, his heart torn between horror at the story and a growing compassion for the woman before him. "And Jeremiah," he finally asked, "how did he die?" Martha gazed at the stars for a long moment before answering. "The winter was harsh," she said finally. "He took sick. Pneumonia, probably. He refused to go down the mountain to see the doctor. One morning, he just didn't wake up." There was a slight hesitation in her voice, so faint it made Jacob wonder if he was hearing the whole truth. But who was he to judge this woman after all she'd endured? "The day he died," Martha continued, "I felt like I could breathe for the first time in decades. It's a terrible thing to say about your own father, I know, but it was like a shadow lifted. Not just from me, but from the girls, too." Jacob took Martha's hands in his, a simple gesture that made her eyes well up again. "No one should have to endure what you endured," he said. "No one." Just then, Sarah appeared at the door, her blue eyes, Jeremiah's eyes, wide in the darkness. "Mommy," she called, her voice small and unsure. Martha turned. "It's all right, dear. Mr. Wheeler and I are just talking. Go on back to bed." Sarah hesitated, looking warily at Jacob before obeying. "She looks like him," Martha said softly. "Sometimes when I look at her, I see him staring back, and my heart stops for a second. But then she smiles, or says something kind, and I remember she's not him. She's herself, in spite of everything. Have you ever wondered how many Marthas are out there, suffering in silence, trapped in cycles of abuse that pass from generation to generation? Leave a comment saying "break the silence" to show you're paying attention to these stories that need to be told. The following months brought a near-normal routine to the cabin. Jacob visited regularly, helping with repairs and bringing small gifts. The change in Martha was remarkable. The woman who once flinched at sudden noises now smiled occasionally. The relationship became the town's main topic of gossip. "It's not natural," commented Abigail Simmons, a local matriarch. "A decent man like Jacob, getting involved with, well, we all know what she is." "She didn't do anything," retorted Elelanina Davis. "She was a victim, not a perpetrator. And those girls are innocent of their parents' sins." Meanwhile, in the cabin, Martha battled her own demons. Nightmares frequently woke her, sweating and trembling, the ghost of Jeremiah still vivid. "Sometimes I think I see him," she confessed to Jacob. "In the corner of the room, or at the edge of the woods. I know it's not real, but it feels so real. Jacob gently suggested she talk to someone. After initial resistance, Martha agreed. Dr. Richard Montgomery, a psychiatrist who visited a larger town monthly, became an unexpected ally. A progressive man, he understood Martha's behavior was a response to prolonged trauma, not a moral flaw. With his support, Martha began the painful process of healing. It was a path with setbacks, but also with small victories. Meanwhile, Sarah, now 7, flourished in school. Her natural intelligence and determination compensated for any difficulties. Ruth, though never fully independent, developed surprising skill in sewing and crafts. But as they grew, questions arose. Sarah, in particular, began asking about her father. "Why don't I have a father like the other kids?" she asked Martha one evening. Martha froze, the glass in her hand trembling. "Your grandfather Jeremiah took care of us after your father left," she said carefully, an omission rather than a lie. "And where did he go?" Sarah persisted. "He wasn't ready to be a father," Martha replied, the words feeling inadequate. Sarah, with a child's intuition, sensed there was more but learned not to press. In 1956, 3 years after Jeremiah's death, Jacob proposed during a picnic in a sunny clearing. Martha was stunned. "Are you sure?" she asked. "After all you know about me, my past." Jacob took her hands. "I know you, Martha. Not just your past, but who you are now. A survivor. A mother who'd do anything for her girls. A woman with more strength than anyone I've ever known." Martha looked at him, tears in her eyes. "I don't know if I can ever be normal, a proper wife." "I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," Jacob replied gently. "I'm asking to build something together, at our own pace." The wedding was a small ceremony in the cabin. Life as Mrs. Wheeler gave Martha a new sense of legitimacy. For the girls, Jacob became the patient, gentle father figure they'd never had. But the past has a way of resurfacing. In 1959, when Sarah was 13, the age Martha was when the abuse began, she found an old diary hidden in the attic. It was her mother's, started after her grandmother's death. The yellowed pages held the raw truth. Her grandfather was also her father, the deaths of her siblings due to consanguinity, her mother's silent suffering. When Martha found Sarah on the bed, the diary open and tears on her face, she knew. "Is it true?" Sarah asked, her voice broken. "Grandpa Jeremiah was my father?" Martha closed her eyes. "Yes," she finally sighed. "Yes, it's true." The revelation shook the family. Sarah became withdrawn, stopped going to school. "I'm a freak," she told Martha. "Half my genes are from the same person. Is that why Ruth is like she is? What's wrong with me that we don't know about yet?" Martha, devastated but determined to be honest, explained the genetics of consanguinity, and that Sarah had escaped the worst physical effects. "But that doesn't mean I'm okay," Sarah argued. "What if I have children? Will they inherit this contamination?" It was Jacob who suggested a genetics specialist. Dr. Benjamin Rosen, a pioneering geneticist in Philadelphia, examined Sarah. "You are not a freak," he told her. "You are a young woman born into difficult circumstances, but that does not define you." He explained how recessive genes work and assured her that if she had children with someone unrelated to the Hollister line, they would likely be healthy. The consultation was a turning point. Sarah began to separate her identity from her origins. Life found a new balance. Ruth's quilts gained recognition beyond the county. In 1962, 16-year-old Sarah met Michael Prescott, the son of a professor studying Appalachian culture. When Sarah eventually told him her history, fearing rejection, he surprised her. "My father is Jewish," he said. "My grandparents escaped the pogroms. I know what it's like to carry family history, to be judged for what people think you represent." Their romance flourished. When Sarah won a nursing scholarship to West Virginia University, Michael supported her. Martha watched with pride and amazement as her daughter carved a path she herself could never have dreamed of. In 1965, Sarah and Michael married in a university chapel. Martha, in a light blue outfit, beamed as she saw her daughter walk toward a future full of choice. That same year, Dr. Montgomery suggested Martha share her story anonymously to help professionals understand abuse and resilience. After much thought, she agreed. Her case, published as Patient H, became a landmark study. In 1970, Ruth died peacefully in her sleep at 29, likely from genetic heart complications, surrounded by her quilts and tapestries. Sarah, now a nurse and mother to 2 healthy children, Elizabeth and James, returned for the funeral. Martha, 53, watched her grandchildren play in the clearing where she, Sarah, and Ruth had once been. There was continuity, but also a necessary break. "They'll never know, will they?" she asked Sarah. "About Jeremiah. About everything." Sarah, her blue eyes now soft with wisdom, replied, "One day, when they're older, I'll tell them a version. Enough for them to understand where we came from and what we overcame. I want them to know their grandmother's strength. How you broke a cycle that could have gone on for generations." Tears filled Martha's eyes. "Do you think it's really possible? Breaking the cycle after so long?" Sarah smiled, a look of knowledge and hope. "Look at them, Mom. Look at me, at Michael. At you and Jacob. We've already broken it." In that moment, as the sun set behind the Appalachians, Martha Hollister Wheeler finally let herself believe that perhaps the sins of the fathers need not be visited upon the children. That with love, courage, and truth, even the darkest stories can find new beginnings. The years passed. The cabin, abandoned after Martha and Jacob's deaths in 1985, slowly returned to the earth. The family cemetery became a peaceful place visited by Sarah and her descendants. The story of the Hollister Wheeler family now lives in academic archives, and in the stories Sarah passed down a narrative of overcoming that replaced a cycle of trauma. Check if you're subscribed to this channel. Don't miss other impactful stories that reveal hidden truths about American families. Subscribe now to keep exploring humanity's darkest secrets. If you made it this far, you must have appreciated this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here." That way I can get to know the viewers who truly connect with the stories on this channel. Don't forget to like and share this video with anyone you think would be moved by this revelation about the dark side of life in the Appalachian Mountains.